So first of all, to confirm the minutes and the decisions from the previous meeting, are there any queries on that, or are we agreed? Agreed. Thank you. Do we have any apologies for absence? I think we've got a full house and some. We've got Councillor Duras as well as Councillor Williams. Welcome. Are there any declarations of interest? No, doesn't look like it. Item 4, public participation. There is none. We have got one item tonight, which is in part 2. But if there are, as long as no other public walk in the door, we'll be okay.
Do you have a member of the public online?
We do. Welcome.
Anne Foster. Is it? Yeah.
Anne Foster. I know that name.
From Mercansted.
Yeah. Yes, and you'll always be a councillor to some of us, but we'll kick you out at the appropriate point. Item 5, referrals to cabinet. There were no referrals. Item 6, cabinet forward plan. Draw your attention to the meeting 20th of May, which is proposed to be cancelled. As one item of business is going to move forward to June. July. I'm not quite sure what that item is. Maybe
it is a quality action plan.
Right. Okay. Moving on to item 7, which is devolution, local government reorganisation. Big topic, lots of people have been talking about it. Quite a few of us been at the District Council Network conference, which most ironically was in Runnymede. And so if you know the story, you'll know that Runnymede is where the barons came and effectively arrested King John. And it seems to me that this is a process of creating new barons. So I don't know if someone was way ahead of me in choosing the where we had that conference, but I suppose it's a no-brainer, isn't it, really, to have a conference on local government near Magna Carta. Anyway, I think I'm going to hand over to Aidan or Darren to give an officer's introduction to this report.
Thank you, Chair. So the paper has 3 recommendations. The first one, the primary one, around seeking Cabinet agreement to submit the interim plan, which was followed on from the paper and has been circulated and published. Submit that to the Secretary of State for Housing. The interim plan is a cross-Hertfordshire plan, so it is from, if agreed by the 11 councils, it is signed off by those 11 councils, so the 1 county and the 10 districts and boroughs, and essentially sets out the options which will be further developed, further tested over the coming months ahead of the government's submission date of November. The end of November, for ideally a consensus proposal to go forward for the future local government model for Hertfordshire. The submission date is tight, the timelines have been tight. Submission date is the 21st, so that is this Friday, hence, and the task, particularly in an area like Hertfordshire, where there are multiple councils, has been not insignificant. So hence some of the specifics around trying to anticipate that there might be ongoing work right up until submission date and catering for that in the recommendations.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, I think it'd be a good moment to say big thank you to officers for spending actually what has been quite a lot of the senior management bandwidth on this particular subject. I'm struck by the fact that conventionally a politician would say that the members of the public might find it difficult to engage with this subject up until the point where they realise their favourite council is going to disappear or could disappear. And so consequently, there's a kind of a dichotomy between how much time you want to spend on this and how much time you probably should. And then you go to a conference on, District Council's network conference, where they talk about virtually nothing else. And while it's true to say that this topic and this subject can be extrapolated into growth potential and all sorts of aspects of why this would be important, an important building block, it's still curious that it has taken up time, and yet maybe it's a difficult subject to put front and centre. So anyway, thank you very much for all that work and all that time. I like to think that all the people in the room made it slightly easier than it would have been. And indeed, I hear that around the country, it has been a little bit possibly more difficult in other places. So all the sensible people in the room and just outside the room have done a good job there. I think just referring to the recommendations and just highlighting the point that this report is deliberately high level, and this report is also quite inclusive of a range of different ideal outcomes. And that's partly what makes it possible for this to come to, I think I'm right, Mark, it makes it possible for it to come to Cabinet rather than full council, because we're not trying to decide what is the version. We're signing off a document which includes a range of potential outcomes. So nothing is signed in blood, and nothing has sailed down the river. We will come to a point later in the year when, according to the current timetable, which of course may shift, we will be required to come to a narrower opinion. And of course, that at that point, I'm sure that it will probably end up coming to full council, and there'll be lots more work done before we get anywhere near that point.
Just to correct the chair on that, it still would be a cabinet decision for proposal. Yes.
Okay, I misunderstood that. I thought that we would have to. But you're the monitoring officer, so
that's the advice we've received yesterday from the council.
I see. Okay, so that's clear. Are there any other comments on this report? Anything that anybody wants to put into this forum? No? In that case, we'll get to the recommendations. Recommendation 1, that Cabinet agrees that the interim plan be submitted to the Secretary of State for Housing, Communities and Local Government, and delegates authority to the Leader of the Council to make any further changes required post-Cabinet and pre-submission following consultation with group leaders. Recommendation 2, that Cabinet agree that the decision is urgent and not subject to call-in. And recommendation 3, the Cabinet notes that the Mayor has agreed that the decision is reasonable in all the circumstances and has agreed that it shall be treated as an urgent decision. Are we agreed?
Agreed.
Agreed. Thank you. Okay, moving on to item 8, which is the Herts IQ future funding allocation proposals. And this relates to the financial circumstances of the Herts Innovation Board. And I'm going to hand over to Diane to give us a fuller introduction.
So the Herts IQ Enterprise Zone was established in 2017. Currently, the financial proposals that the Enterprise Zone works to is that 75% of surplus funds is set aside for major infrastructure projects, 25% for other projects agreed by the board. And the proposals are currently to change the profiling of the allocation of surplus funds until the end of 26-27, so that 100% of surplus funds are allocated to the other projects to be agreed by the board within a set of criteria, and the repayments to the major infrastructure sum will be completed by 2031-32. So that period, the same amount of money will be available for the major infrastructure projects as would be under the current arrangements.
Thank you. Are there any other comments or questions on this point? No? So we'll come to the recommendation, and that is that Cabinet agrees to formally endorse the future funding allocation proposals as set out in section 1.11 of this report, specifically for Dacorum Borough Council as shareholder to formally endorse the interim variation to the Herts IQ financial principles to direct 100% of surplus funds to support business growth activities over an interim period of the financial years 2024-25 to 2027-28. Oddly, there are...
Wrongly numbered, I think.
Okay, so we only have two recommendations, although the second of those recommendations is numbered 4. If you're a maths teacher, you can do all sorts of things with numbers, can't you? And I think we've discovered another one. So the second recommendation is delegates authority to the Council's Strategic Director for Place, following consultation with the portfolio holder for Place, the Assistant Director of Legal and Democratic Services, and the Chief Financial Officer, to enter into any necessary arrangements to document or formalise the revised arrangements, including detailed funding allocation proposals, and to agree any subsequent variations. Are we agreed? Agreed. Agreed. Thank you. Moving on to item 9, which is the financial performance for Q3 of 2024-25. And Councillor Allen, would you like to introduce?
I wouldn't want to take Nigel's thunder, so I'll hand it straight to you.
I'll keep this very brief, given this report has been through 3 scrutinies already. Financial performance is strong in 24-25 and continued from Q2 to Q3. We're now projecting a surplus of the general fund of just under 1.5 million in 24-25, predominantly driven by significant treasury management returns due to higher than expected cash balances and interest rates. So the perfect combination from an investment perspective. That doesn't mean that we don't have financial pressures. We do. The environmental service area is still under pressure, be it from fleet and also from a staffing perspective. And that's something that we're under constant threat from and have been now for a number of years, fighting the challenge to deliver that within budget. Equally, temporary accommodation, a national issue, which is starting to hit the quorum as of February 23, when I think we put the first people into B&Bs and hotels, and now that has grown and continues to grow. There are lots of mitigation strategies for these services around the front door and around how we deliver with the supply and demand, and some of those will form part of our MTFS later this year as well in terms of further investment. So some areas of pressures supported by the Treasury Management investments. We are looking at Treasury Management and cash flow for 25-26 at the moment. Just as a little bit of a headline, the cash balances are looking to be about 20-25% lower at the start of 25-26 than they were in 24-25, which is not a concern. It is in line with what we expected. But it just shows that although we'll probably still provide a surplus in 25-26, not to the level it has done in 24-25, but we'll look at that in the medium term. The other side of our budget is the HRA, which at Q3 is forecasting a surplus. If it can maintain a surplus, which is small, 200,000 on a £70 million budget, so it only takes a fraction of a percentage to go on in terms of income expenditure to lose that. That'll be the first year in 3 years that we will have delivered a surplus on the HRA. And again, I think the volume of work, those that sell the Housing Community Scrutiny Group will have seen the volume of work from HTIP and the service area to achieve that. And it's very much a positive strand. And also, counteracting the national angle in terms of HRA. So from that perspective, a very good start. Hopefully that will maintain as part of our medium-term housing business plan as well. Overall, in terms of capital delivery, fantastic achievement compared to previous years, over 90%, circa 95% of delivery, particularly on the housing front. So we're delivering the capital projects that we've talked about delivering in line with budget, which is a fantastic move, particularly given our struggle in recent years with very sensible, logical reasons in terms of planning moratorium stopping us, and also from some of our contractors having issues. But it's good to see this year that we're back on track in terms of capital spend and delivery. So from that perspective, there's a lot of positive news in here, but there are some undercurrents that we're still having to manage very carefully in terms of operations. Thank you.
Are there any other comments on this report? Anything you want to say?
I think just one small question. 6% depreciation seems a bit too high. Is there a reason why it is 6%, or is it how does that get calculated?
So the depreciation is set out by our financial policies, and we have them reviewed by our external auditor and internal auditor every year for one, consistency and comparability with the sector. That's an average. You're looking at all different asset groups which have very different depreciation levels. Also, a lot of our stock every year, so the housing stock, for instance, is revalued on an annual basis. So that depreciation changes significantly, and a £1.1 billion portfolio in housing can swap by 30-40 million year on year. The houses don't really change, but just dependent on fluctuations on the market. So it's all notional numbers, but what I can give the Cabinet confidence in is that external audit are all over depreciation and buildings, just the largest numbers, and consistency in terms of our approach has been there for a number of years. So from that perspective, we get assurance that we're doing it the right way, but there are a lot of details behind that single number.
Thank you.
The only other thing that I noticed, and it would be quite useful if the strategic planning and environment is bundled together into one number, about £12 million, and because they're quite different sorts of activities between the place and the environmental services, it would be quite useful, why they combined into a scrutiny group rather than being separated into the directorships.
We report based on scrutiny groups because, again, the detailed report that goes to strategic planning and environment will break that down and look at that in more detail. But we've always reported one to the scrutiny group, and then we collate those to this Cabinet group. So it's about consistency in terms of those reporting lines. Things do move from one scrutiny group to the other. In the last couple of years, we have had movements between those groups, which again makes it slightly more confusing, I think, for the layperson. But you have to aggregate these things up. You can't report every line of a 250, 300 million pound a year revenue into hundreds of lines. You've got to aggregate it up to some level.
Good. Okay, let's get to recommendations. Recommend that the Cabinet note the Q3 of 2024-25 forecast, our financial outturn position for the General Fund, the Housing Revenue Account and the Capital Programme. And secondly, that Cabinet recommend to Council the approval of the reserve allocations as detailed in section 7 of the report. Are we agreed? Agreed. Thank you. Okay, moving on to item 10, which is the senior pay policy. And this is obviously very necessary to look at the pay policy for the financial year as required by section 38 of the Localism Act. And I think this might go to Darren to introduce further, or perhaps, sorry, Aidan.
That's all right, that's quite right.
Sorry, Darren.
Thank you, Chair. So, as you rightly say, this is, we are obliged to consider our pay policy every year, to review it, to update it and to publish it, and part of that process is to bring it back to Cabinet. We have done that work. There are some minor changes to what you saw last year, which are set out in the report. I shan't go through them, other than just to note the minor nature of those changes, which are factual rather than policy related. And we seek Cabinet's agreement to the pay policy and to publish it. And you'll note that the second recommendation just allows the Chief Executive and the Monitoring Officer to make any changes within year if any legislation is passed which requires that to happen.
Thank you. So, I mean, I think my main reflection is that when you're thinking about senior pay policy, what matters the most of all is whether you think the council is being well run and everything's going well, and I do. So on that basis, I think it's really important that we have good people in important roles, key roles, and that the council continues to move forward. There is also the issue of local government reorganisation, meaning that it's very important that we continue to have Decorum being an attractive place to work and to lead. Are there any other questions on this report or comments? No? Okay, so the recommendation is number one, that Cabinet recommends to Council it adopts the pay policy for 25-26 as set out in Appendix 1 of this report, and 2, that Cabinet agrees that any amendments to the pay policy throughout the financial year 25-26, which may be required as a result of legislative changes, can be approved by the Chief Executive in conjunction with Council Officer. Are we agreed?
Agreed.
Thank you. Okay. I'm sure all phones have gone to silent now.
Apology.
I haven't checked mine actually.
Quickly ring.
Yes, indeed. As always, which is the reason why my wife can never ring me. Moving on to item 11, which is the parking enforcement and smart technology contract recommendation to award. Councillor Bromham, would you like to introduce this or throw straight to Steph?
From my point of view, it's fairly uncontroversial that I'm not quite sure how much of this is, or whether some of it is part 2 actually.
There is a part 2 procurement report attached, so but we can stay in part 1 unless there's any specific questions for that.
Then, yeah. So the parking contractor is paid by the council to, and they go where directed to enforce parking on double yellow lines and in the car parks, and the fines that are issued come back to the council, so we don't get any sort of conflict of interest there or perversion of punishment or whatever. It's that sort of principle might be called, so I can't say who was actually selected, apart from the fact that it was supplier number
Maybe just
E. But yes, Steph can probably provide a fuller explanation.
Thank you, Chair. So the report asks Cabinet to approve the appointment of a parking enforcement contractor as bidder E, and the appointment should be for a period of 5 years, commencing from the 1st of October 2025. And the report also asks Cabinet to delegate to the Strategic Director of Neighbourhood Operations the practicalities of awarding the contract together with the legal team. The tender took place in autumn, and it was to appoint a parking enforcement contractor. The tender intended to future-proof the future of the enforcement service by strengthening also the strategic aspect of parking enforcement, and that is by introducing the option of smart technology, considering the refreshing of the infrastructure, and being able to use data intelligence based on and actually have decision making based on data. The contract format is following the British Parking Association standard for best practice, and 5 bids were received and they were all compliant. So there was a good interest on the contract, and there was a good choice from our point of view. The tenders were evaluated 60% on quality and 40% on price. The quality of the bids was very good, and the tender exercise was very successful in a sense that the successful bidder was in budget. So despite obviously impending inflationary pressures, which was a concern at the beginning, but the tender was successful in that sense. There were added improvements proposal in relation to software and data provision, which obviously strengthen our ability to enforce and also make sound decision. So overall, it was quite a successful exercise. We had a good result, and the recommendation is to then agree with the appointment of a parking enforcement contractor, bidder E.
Thank you very much. Are there any comments or questions on this item? Councillor Williams.
Yeah, I just wonder, obviously I've read through the recommendations of the report that went to scrutiny into here. I just wonder if there's any way we can see the background to the contract, so specifically the specification for patrol hours. When I was looking after parking, I always made it a requirement that we were able to pay cash in every car park, so a percentage of the machines had to accept cash. I've noticed recently when I've tried to pay cash in 3 of our car parks that the machines that should be accepting cash, the slots are shut. Have we changed our policy, and what's in the new policy about that? I think there should always be an option to pay cash. Where can we find the details behind the contract?
I'm taking part of that point in terms of cash. I think it's generally accepted now that most people who've got a car, who drive a car, actually do have a bank card. We've had tap to pay. I've even got it on my watch, which is pretty universal, and so we don't want to incur the costs of collecting cash. I can't say exactly how many, how far that's been rolled out at the moment, but that does seem to be the most cost-effective way forward, and should not inconvenience any drivers.
Are you saying we changed our policy, Chair?
Steph got the answer there.
Good, thank you, Chair. So the cash option is still an option. We have not changed that policy. As I said, the new contract will be giving us more information in relation to data and more transparency in relation to decision making. So would we wish to change that policy, then there will be information in relation to the reasons of why we want to change that policy, and we would want to modernise and have a different provision. Then that would be a discussion that no doubt will also come through scrutiny and it will be assessed following data. So the cash option is still an option. And we're obviously monitoring in terms of usage, in terms of effectiveness, and in terms of the customers' needs as well, in terms of how different car parks potentially operates in different ways. So that reassured you.
I mean, I think I would just add to that I think we're all keenly aware of how much parking is something that gets discussed and that people are focused, can be focused on. So, and if there is any way, even if it's quite a small way, that car parking charges can be kept down through the efficiency of the operation, then if there's evidence for that, then I'd be keen to see it. But I think notwithstanding Councillor Bromham's stated position with his tappable watch, which I've never heard of, but having said that, I can't remember the last time I went out with much cash in my pocket. So I think it's all about data. It's all about understanding how efficient the process could be, and if it's sufficient to merit such a policy change, then I probably would choose that over, stopping some other non-statutory services. Shall we move to?
Can I just make a point? It may be ahead of any further future decisions, but listening to what Councillor Bromham was saying, it did strike me that there was a level of discrimination arising here, because there could be people who are not able to carry electronic money with them. And certainly people who don't use their watches and accepted. There may be people who aren't able, for whatever reason, to have a bank card, and yet by refusing to allow them to park and pay, that seems to me to be a level of discrimination. And I hope that we will be very careful and very aware of the equalities aspect, that when we come to review the policy, that all of those equalities are taken into consideration.
There has been no policy change.
No, I'm not talking about the policy. I'm not arguing the fact that there hasn't been a policy change. I accept there hasn't been a policy change. I'm just flagging up at some stage, if there is a policy change, equality needs to be taken into consideration.
I certainly agree. I think we need to look at the data. We need to look at equality issues, as we always do in every decision that we take. And if those are in any way concerning, then I would expect that to come out in scrutiny. I think it's part of being in the world that we're in, that we're constantly aware that there are new ways to pay for things, and there are demographic changes which are occurring, and the right way for those things to be considered is in the policy making process when we come to that stage, which we haven't come to yet. I agree with you. Are there any other comments? No? Okay, we'll come to the recommendation on this one, which are that Cabinet approved the recommendation to award the parking enforcement smart technology contract to bidder E for an initial period of 5 years, commencing on the 1st of October of this year. And 2, that Cabinet delegate the authority to the Strategic Director of Neighbourhood Operations to finalise the award of the contract and make amendments if required in consultation with the Assistant Director of Legal and Democratic Services. Are we agreed? Agreed. So now